Hello, and welcome to our advanced webinar series on the best home network setup practices for Roon. My name is Nathan, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Please feel free to stick around until the end of today's webinar, as we'll be holding a live questions and answers session, answering any questions that you might have had throughout this presentation. Today, we'll be covering a few different kinds of topics, and those topics will be optimal practices and setups in your home specifically, how to set up your listening area with your hi-fi equipment. We'll be giving some advanced networking and Wi-Fi tips, and finally, we'll be giving you some helpful tools for troubleshooting common issues that you might be running into. You're welcome to ask us questions throughout this webinar, and we'll be answering your questions live at the end of this session today, so please feel free to keep those questions coming. So, why does a network matter in the first place? To put it simply, Roon requires a properly functioning home network to get the best possible experience. An improperly configured network will give you a bad experience, be it from bad networking hardware or bad connections between hardware. Any of those sorts of issues will lead you to experiencing audio dropouts. Maybe you'll see a remote that infinitely loads and doesn't connect to your core. Maybe you're finding that a certain zone or audio device doesn't show up inside the Roon app. Or maybe you've just grown accustomed to unwanted skipped tracks or interruptions in your playback. None of those experiences are things we'd expect in a proper Roon system. And our goal today is to give you the tools to sort out what's happening and to understand the best way to alleviate frustrations such as those listed. No matter what your network setup is like, there are a few important factors to keep in mind when you're using Roon to make sure that you're getting the best experience. First and foremost, your Roon core should always be wired via Ethernet. And if possible, any audio devices you're using to store music and stream music to your core should also be wired via Ethernet. That specifically means if your music is located on another device and is being streamed over your network to your core, maybe it's a NAS or another PC, we highly recommend that that device is not connected via Wi-Fi, but instead is connected via Ethernet and can directly stream that music to your core, which is also connected via Ethernet. We've found that using an ISP or Internet Service Provider provided router has often caused a poor Roon experience for many of our customers. These ISP provided routers seem to often use underpowered or poorly behaved hardware or software inside of them. And using that gear is often leading to a suboptimal outcome when using Roon in the home. To that same end, we found that a lot of Apple networking gear, such as the Airport Express, the Time Capsule, and the Airport Extreme, all seem to have problems with Roon. Please, if possible, don't use these kinds of networking devices if you wish to have the best Roon experience you possibly can. Also worth noting, Roon does not support multiple subnets. This means that basically all of the devices on your Wi-Fi network or your internet network at home should be in the same IP range. If you can, avoid using different Wi-Fi range extenders or power line adapters when you're using Roon in your home. All of these different changes or smaller adaptations that modify the behavior of your base network will hamper Roon's ability to communicate through your network and see the devices as they're available across your home, and therefore limit the performance that Roon is able to offer when streaming your music to the different devices that you have set up around your Roon system. For now, we're going to go over the optimal setup for a few different kinds of home sizes. First up, small to medium homes. For best performance, you'll want to have your core and your endpoints connected via Ethernet, but your Roon remotes themselves, such as your phone or your iPad, can be connected via Wi-Fi. It's perfectly fine to have one router set up to cover your entire house. This kind of assumes that you don't have concrete or other heavier building materials blocking that signal from reaching around your whole home. However, generally speaking, that single strong router should be able to cover your whole home without any issue. Now, with that said, if you're using a network modem router combo that's provided by your ISP, that's Internet Service Provider again, you're going to want to make sure that that modem router combo is set up in bridge mode, meaning that it's set up to function exclusively as a modem, and then connect a stronger access point or router right up to that modem so that that is what's supplying the Wi-Fi around your home. Essentially, you're using the hardware provided by your internet service provider to bring the internet into your home, and then you're going to supply the device that broadcasts the Wi-Fi around your home so that you can have the strongest signal broadcast throughout. This ensures that you're taking advantage of whatever features are included with that modem and that functionality that you're looking for there, but you're also able to ensure the very best signal and the very best performance from that internal network inside your home via your router. If you find that your router is unable to cover the entire area of your home, then it may be time to add an additional wired access point that is broadcasting to that specific area that isn't connecting or isn't finding the signal from that main router that you're using. Again, you're going to want to wire that access point to your main network. You don't want to use it as a Wi-Fi range extender, as that can break up the different networks inside of your home, and that can break up Roon's ability to see and play back your music across the devices that are inside of your home. It won't be able to see them due to the subnets being created and the discrepancies inside of the network. So we do recommend using a single router if possible, or using a single wired access point in addition to that router if you find that you do need that just little bit of extra reach going on there. When it comes to larger homes, some of the same principles still apply. For example, we're still always going to recommend that you connect your Roon core and your endpoints via Ethernet whenever possible. Of course, your remotes can still connect via Wi-Fi. For a larger setup, multiple access points will likely be needed, and in many cases, and whenever possible, we recommend that these access points be wired via Ethernet directly to your main router in your system. In this case, we recommend Cat5e, that's a 1 gigabit per second cable or better, for ensuring the best performance across your network. Now, if you have a home where running that cable isn't possible, or you simply can't manage the kind of setup that has a router and multiple wired access points around the home, then it's likely that you'll need a mesh style network. Mesh networks could include the Orbi system, Eero, or Velop system. These are all suggestions from us. And these are a system where each access point communicates with each other via a dedicated Ethernet backhaul. And these can connect to any audio endpoints via Ethernet. And that Ethernet connection can be used on the mesh system satellite. Essentially, a mesh system might not be our first choice for recommendation for your network. However, if you're living in a situation where you can't run the cables necessary for a proper router and endpoint setup, mesh networks are a wonderful stand-in. And with the backhaul system that mesh networks use, they can communicate very adequately and directly to their main router system and back to your modem. And the Ethernet ports that are located on those mesh router satellites function wonderfully as direct Ethernet connections that you can use for your core or your audio endpoints. For larger homes, or for any home really, it's perfectly fine to have your Roon core in a server closet or a rack, and then have your audio devices connected via Ethernet directly to the network, or to use a Roon bridge also connected to your network as an in-between connection for managing that stream from your core to your devices. we recommend avoiding managed switches whenever possible. Managed switches have been known to need just the right amount of tweaks to work properly. And when in doubt about what settings are needed, we really recommend using an unmanaged switch if you're going to be using a switch for managing your network needs when using Roon. Now, what about designated listening areas? When streaming music through Roon, we highly recommend using the communication protocol that supports the highest sample rate for your music. Now, in that instance, when you're using Roon, and hopefully you're using a Roon Ready device, we highly recommend using Roon Ready Streaming, as that will ensure the best quality signal in every instance versus Chromecast or AirPlay. You'll want to tweak the sound in your listening room by implementing Roon's DSP functionality. And some of those different functionalities will require different EQ settings and different kinds of Roon solutions for sounding best. That all that decision making will be entirely up to you, and it'll be up to your ear to decide what those EQ settings you want to be are best suited for your listening setup and for your listening room. We can always dig into those in another webinar, or if you have any specific questions, we can touch on those at the end of this session. And now for some thoughts on Wi-Fi. The bottom line is that ultimately Wi-Fi is, in terms of sound quality, noisy, and in terms of performance, unreliable. It's really mainly designated for being used by your remote on your phone or on your iPad, and it's not the best for audio streaming. It'll work in a pinch, but it's not what we recommend. Now, it is true that Wi-Fi can traverse through walls and makes a lot of things a lot more convenient for a lot of setups. But that also means that it can cause interference issues. And because of that, we often recommend using a 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi connection, as this has broader bandwidth and less interference from other neighboring Wi-Fi channels than 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi. Sometimes Wi-Fi issues can occur simply because you're in a large city or you have multiple neighbors who are broadcasting on their own personal Wi-Fi setups. It even can be interfered with if someone's using a microwave in the same home. If you have many routers or access points set up on the same Wi-Fi network channel, those multiple routers, especially if they're not set up as a mesh system or something similar, will cause increased congestion and, again, hamper the performance and effectiveness of your Wi-Fi network. Another reality of technology and the changes that come from time is that Wi-Fi protocols change over time. If you're using an older PC for Wi-Fi, it very well could have an old network card, and that may just not support certain speeds or certain types of network protocols. Mesh-style Wi-Fi networks are still Wi-Fi. They use their own extra Wi-Fi channel to communicate from node to node, that's the little puck, to another little puck. And that means that they have an extra channel or an extra way of communicating to each other past the majority of the congestion in a home. But again, they're still Wi-Fi. At the end of the day, Wi-Fi is noisy. It's really mainly for using your remote, and it's used there for convenience. If you can, we recommend using Ethernet. However, sometimes you just have to use Wi-Fi. We get it. But just to make sure it's all clear, Ethernet is our main recommended source for listening to your music. And when you ask us, we're going to ask, can you plug it in via Ethernet? And we'll see if that'll offer better performance for your system. Digging into some advanced networking tips here. When we're talking about managed and unmanaged switches, we find that managed switches often cause issues with Roon. We mentioned this a little bit earlier, but again, just to reiterate, we recommend using an unmanaged switch for using your Roon setup. We want simplicity here. We don't need detailed rules changing how your network switch performs. We just want it to act as a simple touch point for communicating, and we want Roon to be able to communicate as freely as possible the devices on your network. Power line adapters, that is, adapters that plug into the power outlet in your wall and communicate your internet connection through the literal electricity in your walls, and range extenders, both are similarly unreliable. Instead, we really recommend that you use a mesh style network, or again, whenever possible, you use a direct Ethernet connection if you at all can possibly do it. We recommend that you change the default DNS servers on your device when you're setting up a router. The ISP DNS server that's often provided by your internet provider is frequently unstable. We've found, and we generally recommend, the reliability coming from either the Cloudflare DNS, the Quad9 DNS, or Google's DNS. If you use IP address communication inside of Roon, we highly recommend that you use an IP address reservation, as usually IP address lease time is relatively short. It's about 24 hours. So if you're going to use IP communication, we recommend that you set up an IP address reservation in your router specific to Roon. You'll be able to find that setting inside your router, and that'll ensure the most reliable performance there. If you're not sure what this particularly means, that's okay. Chances are it's not something that you're looking to use. However, if you are interested in managing the IP address communication, manage that performance inside of Roon, make sure that you're using an IP address reservation in your router configuration. If you want to use IPv6, just keep in mind that while Roon does work via IPv6, it's still a technology that's being rolled out. And if possible, we do recommend that you use IPv4 if you're currently seeing any issues when using IPv6. Next up, troubleshooting some common issues. If you're experiencing any problems, you can save a lot of time and headache by running some really basic tests on your network. And the philosophy that we'd like to keep in mind is really just the process of simplify and then rebuild. You're going to eliminate certain aspects of your network, certain things that might be causing trouble. You're going to try and take away the number of problem factors, and then put things back together and see, now that I've removed this particular maybe cable, maybe a piece of networking hardware and replaced it with something else, or made a connection more direct and removed an interim device. Any of that simplification process can account for, finding out, hey, whatever I removed from that setup was actually the issue. And we find that oftentimes taking a network apart and simplifying it is the easiest way to create a good troubleshooting step. If you just leave the router and Roon core connected and see if the issue persists, and then you can continue to add complexity. Again, you just take your device that's your core, have it Ethernet connected to your router, and then see if your remote still can't see it. Or maybe if you need to directly connect your audio zone via Ethernet, and then see, does my audio zone still not show up when directly wired? Again, we're simplifying the number of connections here, removing that Wi-Fi step, so on and so forth. You want to make sure that your Roon core and your remotes are on the same internet network as each other. If they're not on the same internet network, then they won't be able to see each other. And that means ensuring that while your core is wired, the Wi-Fi network that it's being broadcast to is still the same Wi-Fi network that you're used to using in your home as a part of what you're connecting your remotes to. Got to make sure that that network, that subnet, are all the same thing so that all the different devices are able to see each other. If you have an ISP provided modem router combo unit, and if you're using another router that you yourself have provided to broadcast the Wi-Fi around your home, make sure that only one of those devices is performing the routing and IP address assigning. Again, you want to make sure that your network provider provided modem router combo device is set up in bridge mode. that it's not also acting as that secondary router function, because you want to use your own router that you provided. Making sure it's in bridge mode will basically guarantee that you're not running into improper IP provisioning. It'll make sure that you're not running into funky network routing for different devices connecting to the wrong networks, even though they're named the same thing, and things of that nature. Want to make sure that all of those little areas are tidied up so that you have a very clean signal and a clean overall network setup that your devices are able to connect to. VPNs and Apple Private Relay are different services that can cause Roon to not work properly at all. What you're doing is you're tricking the Roon core into thinking that it's part of a different network, or you're tricking your device into thinking that it's not inside of the network that you're looking to be a part of. And that would mean that that core is not able to see the devices that are on the network because, well, it doesn't think they're there, or it thinks it's a part of a totally different network, and therefore it has no clue to search for those devices that are on your network. So we recommend that you not use any of those VPN services unless that VPN is configured specifically on your router. A router VPN means that the entire network is being privately kind of isolated out to a separate location. It's being broadcast as a whole unit, and your core will be a part of that whole unit as it's being VPN'd across the world. And because it's still a part of that whole network with all the devices on it, it will be able to see them and still be able to connect and play your music as you would expect. Most routers have a setting called IGM proxying or IGMP snooping. If you're having issues with multicast, which would mean device discovery, you can try to toggle that switch just on and off and see if that helps with any of those issues. Now, if you have any questions about where to get help, any of the topics we've covered today have brought new questions to mind, or maybe we haven't addressed the question that you're looking for help with today, we're happy to give some general advice as far as what best practices are, how to use Roon, how you can best facilitate what's going on in your system. But when it comes to active troubleshooting and making the most of solving a current problem that you're trying to work through with your system, reach out to us on Community. We have a full-time staff there, and our whole community of people that are inside of the Roon Labs community are super helpful and extremely knowledgeable. It's a great resource for gaining knowledge, associating with like-minded people, and ideally finding solutions to the problems that you might be experiencing with Roon. So reach out to us at community.roonlabs.com. We're happy to connect with you, and we hope our community can be a great resource working with you to finding a solution to whatever you have questions on when using Roon. If you're looking for tools for just learning more about Roon, solving your own problems, seeing screenshots of how things work, and just generally building a better knowledge of how Roon works and what it's able to do, go to help.roonlabs.com. It's a huge knowledge base we provide with tons of troubleshooting and useful resources for understanding what Roon is capable of and how helpful it can be as a tool. Again, go to community.roonlabs.com for direct access to our technical support team, as well as our community that is full of technically knowledgeable people and a huge resource for active troubleshooting and problem solving for your system. If you're looking to learn more and understand more about Roon, go to help.roonlabs.com. Again, thanks so much for joining us. We'll be opening up our questions and answers session now, and we'll be answering any questions that you had live. Thank you again so much for your time. Hello, everybody. Thank you again for joining us. I will pop us on back to that previous slide with the information on community as well as on our knowledge base. Awesome resources. Want to make sure that everybody has easy access to seeing those. Definitely recommend marking down those links and checking them out when you get a chance. We have quite a few questions that have come in, and it's very exciting. We're thrilled that everyone was able to tune in and join us today. And hopefully we'll be able to get to a good number of your questions. A lot of questions will be answered live here. Throughout this webinar, people have been asking questions and we've been answering them directly in line in chat as well. So we've been trying to discuss things with you directly as best we can, but for the sake of this webinar and for recording, we'll also be answering some questions live as well, maybe giving some extra details. As mentioned before, my name is Nathan. Norris is joining me here as well to offer some much needed expertise on a lot of these subjects. So hopefully we can get you some great answers through here. So I guess we'll kick it off with one of the first questions was, can I have a copy of this presentation? Worried about taking notes and getting all the information down. Yeah, absolutely. We have recorded this whole webinar and it will be available on our YouTube channel. So once this is done, we'll do a little bit of trimming down and that will be available on the Roon Labs YouTube channel for you to watch at your own leisure. So yeah, no need to worry about if you missed anything, you'll be able to access this and our other live streams from YouTube. One question was, can you explain with examples how we define power line adapters? Power line adapters came up earlier on in the webinar discussing things we might not recommend for the most reliable types of networks. A power line adapter is most simply a little internet dongle that you plug into your wall that sends internet through the electrical circuitry that's inside of your home. That circuitry is not designed for internet information to be passed. However, this, through the magic of technology, I don't know exactly how, is able to send internet information through the electricity in your walls. For homes that are full of cement, rebar, things that restrict your ability to broadcast Wi-Fi, but also B, your ability to run new Ethernet runs from point A to point B. Power line adapters are often used to kind of circumvent that and communicate internet from one place to another. We don't recommend them just for the simple fact that they aren't necessarily as robust as a traditional internet network. They're possible to give you issues. You might run one in your home right now and it might just be fine, and that's great. We're not saying that you're going to break something in Roon by trying this solution, but if you're experiencing trouble with Roon and you're using a power line adapter, chances are it's going to be the first thing we'll ask to see if we can remove that from your system to see if the problem goes away when the power adapter goes away. Yeah, any examples of other info people might want to know, Norris, on that one?
I'm sorry, so the power line adapters?
Yeah.
Yeah, so no, it's just going through the electrical wires. It doesn't really work because, there's different codes that are used for electricity in different countries. So sometimes power line adapters may work really well in one country while they're not working as well in another country. And just generally speaking, this is an evolving kind of technology. There have been huge improvements in power line adapters, but we just generally suggest staying away from them because some may be unreliable, we found.
Totally. Thanks. So yeah, hopefully that clears up our reservations for networks that have power line adapters for your internet. The next question was asking about the operation of your Roon core in the case of an ISP outage. So there's no internet coming into your home. What do we recommend? What's going on there? Your core is able to function without a connection to the internet for short periods of time. It will intermittently phone home to us at Roon to make sure that it's licensed and that it's up to date and that it gets all the metadata from our services on our end. But it can operate for short periods of time with no internet connection at all. Of course, while it's not online, you won't be able to stream from services like Tidal or Qobuz. However, local music that you have saved on any drive that's connected to your core will still be accessible. there's no setup or really anything that you would need to change or do about your system for that functionality to exist. If your network goes offline and it's going to be out for the night, your nucleus or whatever core you're using will work just fine. But long term, your core does need a pretty consistent internet connection for it to just stay up and running. Otherwise, it'll say, hey, it's offline, and it'll start causing problems long term. Okay, the next question was I have wired Ethernet from certain receivers in the home, and they have high-res DACs built in. And they've noticed that when streaming to those receivers via AirPlay, that it is playing at 1644.1 instead of the higher resolutions that might be available. They're contrasting this with a MyTech DAC that is Roon Ready certified, and that DAC is able to play high-res music at whatever the source file is. What's been noted here is kind of a discrepancy between what quality files that AirPlay is able to transport, which is capped at 1644.1, versus Roon Ready, which does not have that ceiling cap for resolution. So if you have a DST source file, or if you have an ultra high res source file, Roon Ready devices will be able to receive and stream that music, no problem at all, where an AirPlay device, when connected to Roon, won't be able to see that resolution due to the actual roadway that AirPlay transport isn't able to pass along the information. Therefore, you won't be able to utilize the full capability of your DAC in that sense. It's definitely why we recommend Roon Ready network bridges. You can plug those into the digital inputs on your AVR that you're using, and that will give you the access you need to get the full resolution capability that your device has, because Roon is able to see the device through Roon Ready streaming, and then that digital input that your device has will be able to communicate that full res file without the limitation that AirPlay is applying to your music stream. Next question was to explain what a managed switch is. I do believe we sent out a glossary along with this webinar invite. So hopefully that helps to give some good technical definitions on terms like that you might have questions on. But put simply, a managed switch is a device that has a whole bunch of Ethernet ports on it that you connect to your router or to your modem that you're using to turn one Ethernet port into a bunch of them, very simply. A managed switch gives you a bunch of control over what information is allowed to be communicated over those Ethernet ports. And that has a bunch of different implications going into it. Trying to keep it kind of 1,000-foot view so it doesn't get too confusing. You just get to decide what information comes in, what information goes out from those Ethernet ports. You're managing all the devices that go into that switch, the thing that has all of the Ethernet ports on it. An unmanaged switch is just a roadway, if you will. It is taking all of the information and letting it go through and connect to the internet. All the devices connected to it don't have special rules applied to them based on what port they're connected to. So that's the difference between a managed internet switch and an unmanaged internet switch.
And sorry, I just want to say, whenever you
please.
have an issue and you're using a managed switch, it's always best just to try to replace it with an unmanaged switch to see if the problem persists. Because oftentimes, like Nathan mentioned, managed switches have certain multicast settings or flow control settings that often interfere with Roon working properly.
Absolutely. Norris knows best. When the next question is, when any future plans to provide a webinar talking about DSP? I like the terminology of providing a cookbook and documentation on how to use DSP. I'm going to point you to help.roonlabs.com right there on that screen there. Please check it out. If you type in DSP into the little search bar, you're going to find a whole host of information on every single DSP thing Roon does, as well as an explanation on how does it work, why did we implement it that way, what's the technology behind what we're doing for that specific feature. Super, super helpful resource. really great tool. When people ask me, how do I do something in DSP? Chances are I'm checking that to make sure that my information is right when I give you an answer. So yeah, help.runelabs.com, jump over to DSP, see what Rune has to offer. In terms of webinar, that's something we've gotten requests for coming up to this one. It's something we're looking into doing in the future. I can't make any promises, of course, but we'd love to expand what we cover, and DSP certainly could be a really cool addition to our webinar series. Let's see. Someone's asking, about a particular brand of hardware being certified as Rune Ready. Give you a little bit of background on what goes on in the Rune Ready process. We work directly with the manufacturer when we receive their hardware on site at our labs. We perform testing. We make sure that they're implementing our streaming code properly. We make sure that it integrates perfectly with the Rune app. We make sure that, when you switch inputs and then press play in Rune, does it properly switch back? Does the volume when it switches back match exactly what the Rune app says? We do a whole bunch to make sure that your experience when using that Rune Ready device with Rune is perfect. So when you ask the question, hey, when is my device going to be certified as Rune Ready? We're always going to encourage you to go talk to the manufacturer, because at the end of the day, it's usually their team working to implement our code. And we don't want to, say something that they're not ready to say. And so we always recommend, when you're looking to discover when something's about to be announced as Rune Ready, talk to the manufacturer who's doing the implementation. They'll be able to give you the most accurate answer for that. But you can bet that we will be broadcasting and announcing as soon as they're ready. As soon as the device is ready to be announced as Rune Ready. If you're on our emailing list, we will make sure that you're also aware that, hey, this new Rune Ready device is now on the market. Now we're asking about particular new endpoints being added to a system. In this specific instance, customers asking about a Sonore piece being added to an existing listening system they have in their home. Put simply, the term we would use here is Rune Bridge. And what that means is you have a streamer, something that's connected to your network, that is connected to your existing legacy hardware that might not be internet capable, or maybe it's like the earlier example of something that does AirPlay, but it doesn't do Rune Ready streaming. So when you're connecting that Rune Ready device, that Rune Bridge, to your existing hardware, you're showing your Rune core. This is the device. You can use the Rune Ready roadway to get all of that information to this device. And from there, you'll have the capability to pass all of the information that your device's DAC is able to understand through that network bridge, through, say, an optical or a coaxial or even USB digital connection. It basically transforms that network communication from being through the Ethernet port to whatever digital port is native to the DAC that's connected to your device. So in that case, yeah, you're using basically a streamer to make the information understandable to your DAC so that it can play music. We have a question about what is the minimum recommended bandwidth, regardless of connectivity, be it Ethernet or Wi-Fi, that is recommended for streaming 2496 audio. So 24-bit 96 kilohertz audio. Norris found this for me that says that the recommended bandwidth for that, based off of math that I do not understand, is about 4.61 megabits per second. You don't need a whole ton of bandwidth to stream audio. Fortunately, even large audio files are relatively compact in terms of bandwidth. And so you don't need gigabits or anything like that for streaming audio. Of course, more bandwidth is better. You have more headroom. But in this case, we'll say around 5 megabits per second, you'll be more than set for streaming a 2496 size file. Anything to add on that? Yeah. I didn't understand the math exactly on how that number came out, but.
Yeah, so to add to that, that's just for the audio stream itself. If you're doing other things on the network, like you're streaming video or something, that obviously takes away from the available bandwidth. So that's just, towards Rune. If you have more users on the network, you're obviously going to need a faster speed because there's also going to be more streams going, assuming you have different streams in different rooms.
There you have it. That's perfect. So yeah, you do want extra headroom again because other devices use your internet. Want to make sure that there's space for everything to use the roadway. Next question is, I have my primary system connected via Ethernet and use remote devices via Wi-Fi. They like to upscale and they want to create a primary group for all of their devices. They're asking, why would we not recommend adding Wi-Fi devices in the same group with the Wi-Fi endpoints? That is kind of up to you. Our recommendation to use Ethernet ultimately is this is what's most reliable. We find that wireless can drop out, wireless can work for a while, and then something changes, either in the networks around you or in the buildings around you, and then your Wi-Fi doesn't work, and it's frustrating. So that's where you use a wire, it's going to be reliable. Now, in terms of setting up and grouping all of your devices, if you're finding that certain devices might not group with each other, or you're just wanting to make sure that everything sets up properly when you go about creating the system, make sure that everything that you're using in Rune is using the same protocol if you want to group them all together. We can only stream music to grouped zones that are grouped together with the same streaming protocol. We can't send music to an AirPlay and a Chromecast grouped together because they're using different methods of communicating that music. The way that they determine the timing that the music reaches your device is different. And if we did try to group those together, we couldn't guarantee that it'd be a cohesive output. We couldn't guarantee that they would sound, like they're playing music at the same time. It just makes things too complicated. And we can't guarantee that you're going to get good output on the other side. So if you're finding, hey, I can't group this specific hardware, maybe Sonos hardware, with my Rune Ready streamer in my main system, chances are it's because your main streamer is set to stream via Rune Ready, and your Sonos devices are streaming via Sonos Streaming or AirPlay. Can't group those together. They're different codes. And that would be the holdup in a setup like that. So if you're looking to group everything together in one home and you want to make sure that you're able to do that and have everything synced together, just make sure that everything supports the same streaming protocol. In an instance where maybe you have a main listening system, but then you just want distributed audio around the home, you have a Rune Ready device ready to go for your main listening system. If it also supports AirPlay, you can add it via AirPlay and then group that AirPlay version of the zone with all the other AirPlay devices around your home. Totally acceptable solution. Just got to make sure everything's using the same streaming protocol at the end of the day. So last question I'm seeing currently is any plans on adding my favorite streaming service, we'll say, to Rune? And the answer is, yeah, we'd love to. The reality is that we require very specific integrations on our end to report the quality of the stream, to report the size of the files being streamed. We need to be able to do all of the metadata enhancements we're doing when the music is displayed inside the Rune app. So it's a very hands-on process in making sure that that streaming service is properly integrated into Rune. It's something that we're equipped to do. It's something that we're very open to doing with really any streaming partner available. It's just a matter of, are they willing to work with us? So if you have a streaming service in mind that you'd love to see in Rune, let them know. Make sure that they know that they can reach out to us and that they have customers who are interested in seeing that service available on our platform. And that's our best recommendation, is make sure the streaming service you're interested in seeing in Rune knows Rune's here and that we're ready to integrate with them. Let's see. Next questions come in. Do you still recommend using an endpoint as opposed to directly connecting the Roon core to a USB DAC, for example? We generally do recommend having your core isolated via a Ethernet connection or a network connection from your listening system, if at all possible. Cores are computers, and computers make noise. It's the simplest way to put it. So if you can have a network streamer or just a DAC that does network streaming and use that network connection instead of a USB cable where that run is shorter and the computer is closer to your listening system, that's what we'd recommend. We'd recommend, establishing that distance, using that network connection in your favor. So yeah, that's kind of the broad definition. Anything past that, any specifics that go into hardware or specific kinds of network setups, we recommend Ethernet. We recommend both sides being wired for the sake of reliability. So yeah, that's generally the recommended setup when doing a high-end system with Roon. Any more questions coming in, Norris?
Not that I'm seeing. Sorry, I've been answering questions in the chat as well. I'll forget while you were talking here.
Any standout ones that we could answer?
Let me look over here. Maybe more about managed switches. User would like us to talk more. He understands the problem. Yeah, it's just, it's a potential area where Roon can run into issues if you're using a managed switch. Obviously, you can configure them properly to use them with Roon, but you have to have just the right settings. As mentioned before, you have to have like your multicast settings working properly, which is generally called IGMP snooping or IGMP proxying in networking terms. And then you also have to make sure that everything is on the same subnet or VLAN. Because if Roon is on a different subnet or VLAN than your audio devices, Roon won't be able to communicate properly with that. And then you also have to keep in mind, like if you're daisy chaining managed switches together, especially then, like you're connecting one managed switch to another managed switch, you can have even more problems because then Roon has to traverse to multiple switches to get to the destinations.
Awesome. Yeah, that's very much your field of expertise. I know only a smidgen about the difference between using switches in that capacity. Someone asked about raising their hand. Please type out your question. We won't be bringing you on the broadcast to ask your question live. If you could type it out in chat, we'll be able to give you an answer there.
Here we go. A few more came in. We got Perfect. One about the Nucleus sound quality. Why does Nucleus improve sound or perceive sound? Nathan, can you please go into some of those examples?
Yeah, so we at Roon are not going to make a claim that Roon will improve the sound quality of your system. At the end of the day, that's subjective. That's up to your ear to decide how your system sounds and how Nucleus impacts that. Totally up to you and what's going on in your system. There are a few factors on why Nucleus might sound good. And the first and foremost is that it's fanless. It doesn't have any parts inside that are moving, that are vibrating, that are making additional noise. We did design it to be a Roon core. It has no overhead running. We've put a lot of effort into making sure it is a audiophile component. So it's flattering to hear that you feel that Nucleus improves your sound in your system. That's awesome. It's a testament to the fact that we really do care about the audiophile element that goes into streaming music and putting out high quality listening experience for your system. But at the end of the day, I think it really boils down to those few core facts: that it's a fanless device that's dedicated to running Roon. It doesn't have any other software overhead. The processor is not being overheated or isn't being stressed by load that another operating system might put on it due to running other applications. It's just a very focused and dedicated component. To the other question of what does wired Ethernet connection improve sound versus Wi-Fi, not something I can really speak to. I'd say we're still going to recommend Ethernet simply for the sake of reliability. That is something we can guarantee that you're going to have a dropout-free experience, and hearing music is certainly better than not hearing music, at least in my opinion. Past that, I think there are companies, manufacturers out there have done their own research on how the waves inside of a Wi-Fi repeater might impact the performance of a system. I encourage you to go Google that and see what opinions you might walk away with that. That is not something that we will necessarily take a stand on, but totally up to you to decide. How do you see if you're using IPv4 or V6? You want to touch on that one, Norris?
Yeah, absolutely. So IPv4 is the traditional IP that you see. It's usually like 192.168.1. Whatever range, starting from 1 with your router to all your devices up to 255. And then IPv6 is the new kind of internet protocol where it's much longer in string. So it can be, for example, 2001, semicolon, and then you go into hex, you can have like 0BF and then another semicolon. And this goes on for a while. So this pattern is different. So IPv4, basically, you're only going to see numbers in the IP. And then IPv6, it's generally speaking longer, and it can include characters because those are represented as hex values.
Perfect. Yeah, hopefully that touches on what you're looking for. If not, feel free to clarify your question as well, and we can hopefully come back around to it. I saw a question here earlier that I wanted to touch on. Let me make sure I find it. Let's see. Okay. I do know that I grabbed this one. Do you guys know of any streamers that are Roon ready and that's all the device does? It doesn't have a DAC or proprietary music software installed or anything like that. There's a couple options here. First and foremost, I'd encourage you to check out the Roon store, store.roonlabs.com. We are working with partners to distribute some of the awesome stuff that they're making and make it accessible to Roon users to try out and see what they're doing. When I read what you've mentioned, the iFi Zen stream immediately came to mind, which is available on the Roon store. It's a Roon ready network bridge. It does not have a DAC inside. It has USB audio out and I believe coaxial audio out. So easily does what you're looking for in terms of just a simple device that does Roon ready streaming. If you're looking for something even more stripped down than that, you can always look at building your own Raspberry Pi solution. You can use any of the pre-built, they don't call them operating systems. What do they call them, Norris, for Raspberry Pis?
Yeah, no, it's an.
They call it an operating system.
Yeah, it's a Raspberry Pi operating system.
Yeah, so there's RoPie. It's 3 E's on the end. RoPie. Any other top ones that we recommend for getting Roon ready?
DietPi.
DietPi. Two good ones. You can kind of DIY your own solution if you don't want proprietary software on your Roon ready streamer. Built into your Raspberry Pi, just on that little board, you're going to have USB audio out. There are Raspberry Pi hats that let you do either a DAC or other kinds of digital audio outputs right there on your device. Very DIY, but it's also very affordable. And hopefully will give you kind of that more stripped down experience that you're sounds like you're looking for your streaming needs there. Let's see. The question about IPv4 versus IPv6, he's asking where the setting lives in Roon, I believe.
Yes.
Or
So you can
Maybe the
find
setting lives on his router.
So you can find out what kind of IP you're using in Rune settings general. Under the Rune core, it provides you the Rune core name and the Rune IP address. 9 times out of 10, though, is going to be IPv4 because, as mentioned earlier, IPv6 is still being rolled out, and it's in very few countries being used at this time. So it's more likely going to be IPv4.
Got it. Chris also gave a good summation there too, where you go into your core inside of Rune settings, and you look at the IP address listed for your core. An IPv4 address would look like sets of numbers separated by periods. That's 10.10.1.123 or whatever it is. Whereas an IPv6 address would be listed and include letters. So it would be FFF colon 10.10.1.10 or something like that. So you'll see and know the difference based off of that address that's listed. And hopefully that clears things up a little bit. But as Nora said, chances are, if you don't know, it's IPv4, you're all set. Don't need to worry about it. We have a question on why does Rune sell 2 nucleuses? Great question. The standard nucleus is our core for everybody. By and large, let's say 90% of the people who use Rune, chances are the standard nucleus is all they need. It's able to stream up to 6 zones simultaneously. It is able to manage sizable libraries. And on our website, we say, hey, if you're doing specific DSP things, it might be able to do them. And the goal of that phrasing is actually a little vague so that you talk to us and we can talk to you about your system. We have a chat on our store. Feel free to use it. I'll say hi. The reality is that that DSP function that we're describing there is somewhat limited, is specifically PCM to DSD upsampling. And even more specifically, if you are upsampling a high-res PCM file to DSD 256 or higher. Nucleus can do 256, especially if you're only doing one zone. But anything past that, and you want to upsample streamed music coming from Tidal or Qobuz, and it's PCM and you want it to be in DSD on output, then you're going to need the horsepower, that additional processing power that Nucleus Plus has. The other thing that we point out is if you have a really big library, so if you already have 100,000 tracks in your library or you plan to have more than that, time to start talking about Nucleus Plus. So in summary, standard Nucleus, great for most people. If you're not sure, you have a relatively small library, you don't have a lot of zones, go for the standard Nucleus. That's all you'll need. If you have a really big music library, more than 100,000 tracks, you plan on streaming to more than 6 zones. You have 10 rooms in your house, you want to stream to them all at once. That's where the Nucleus Plus comes in. Or if you're doing really intensive DSP feature usage, so you're doing crazy PCM to DSD upsampling, you want to do a whole lot of DSP feature usage across your whole home, stuff like that is where the Nucleus Plus really comes in. Let's see. Someone's asking, hey, are you suggesting to put a streamer between your Rune core and your DAC rather than directly connecting, say, a Nucleus directly to the DAC? If at all possible, that is in fact what we are recommending. We know it's not always possible, and you're going to use your system however you best can, and that is totally fine. It's not like you're doing something wrong by connecting your core directly to your DAC. However, when asked for preferences and best recommendations that we can give you, we're always going to say, put a streamer between whatever device is your core and your listening system. That is isolating, again, a computer that makes noises from your precision listening system. And that is an easier way to guarantee that you're optimizing and making the most of the capabilities of your listening setup. So that is the recommendation that we would give. Quick question here, is the ZenStream considered an endpoint? Yes, it is. It is a Rune-ready streamer. Anything that can receive that audio coming from your Rune core and then broadcast that audio out to either speakers or another part of your listening system that'd be an endpoint. The app on your phone counts as an endpoint. The app on your computer counts as an endpoint. Endpoints are really what allows your core to actually make the sound happen. It's if your music's coming in from your internet network and it's coming into your Roon core, and your core is the brain of your system, anything that core is sending the music to, that's able to transport that music via a different type of digital technology, or that is able to make that into music, that would be an endpoint in your system. Let me see here. So a lot of questions coming in. Thanks everybody for all this engagement. It's awesome to see that everyone's really interested and has so many questions. I think we've covered a lot of what's come in. Any other standouts, Norris? I know we've chat answered some of them, but
I mean, there is one about the nucleus in one room and having a DAC system in another room via an unmanaged switch. And the user is asking if that is better or worse than back-to-back cascading switches. I would say that yes, using an unmanaged switch is preferable whenever possible, especially if it's multiple managed switches that you're bypassing. So I would definitely say that regardless of the cascading style, using less switches would give you less possible points of failure. And also using them in unmanaged mode or unmanaged hardware is just better overall, because you don't have to configure everything inside the managed switch.
Awesome. Perfect. Wow. So questions coming in. We're going to wrap it up here in just a couple minutes. So thank you for all your questions. We'll be hosting another webinar just like this one next week. So if your question wasn't answered and you'd like to see it answered live, feel free to tune in next week. Otherwise, do feel free to reach out to us on community. Norris, super active there. He's one of the people who works here at Roon that's going to be answering your questions, especially for technical troubleshooting. So community is an awesome place to get in touch with us and get really good answers to any questions you have. Again, the general the cookbook of information that you might be able to just pull from and understand what Roon is able to do is help.roonlabs.com. DSP, network setup, adding a NAS, adding really, you name it, we probably have an article in help.roonlabs.com on what Roon is able to do. It's very thorough, includes screenshots, very accurate descriptions of what to do. Highly recommend checking out. It's an awesome resource. Let's see. We have some questions about a specific something. I don't know what the public line is on this yet, Norris.
Which one?
People are asking about using Roon remotely. That's on our roadmap. That is something that we've heard. We understand that it's a desire that people have. We're listening. I promise. You'll be excited about it. Let's see. A session on Roon integration with home automation and voice control. That's a great question. Right off the bat, Roon doesn't really integrate with voice assistants at this time. It's probably more of a distant future thing, but unfortunately, we can't do a webinar on it because it's not a feature that exists in Roon. As far as home automation, certainly a subject that we can touch on a bit more. Nucleus and the Whirlwind server both have Crestron and Control4 drivers built in. It's pretty cool. It's a very nice, tightly knit integration from their direct drivers to those two cores, and those two cores are exclusive to having those drivers. You're also welcome to reach out to us directly to talk about whatever home automation system you're using in your home, and maybe we can work with you on specifically how we can implement Roon in whatever setup you're using. So yeah. So hopefully that covers a little bit of what you're looking for there. Cool. Appreciate everyone's time. Thank you so much for joining us. I will give the typed answers just a little bit more time to catch up, but we appreciate all your feedback. We are grateful that everyone was able to join us. Again, check out community, check out help.runelabs.com for more information and to be able to ask more questions and discuss with us. Thanks for joining us. And again, we'll be doing another webinar next week. So feel free to join us then, and we will catch you then. Thanks so much.